Hey everyone, we're going to take a quick first look at Oregorger, the second boss of the Blackrock Foundry raid instance. Obviously, all of this footage comes from the Warlords of Draenor beta, so everything is subject to change. The fight is comprised of two phases alternating back and forth, twice each, before the boss finally enters a sort of enrage phase. On the beta, this phase was not working correctly, but it's probable that on live servers, the enrage will indeed wipe the raid. The central mechanic of the fight revolves around the boss's resource of ore. The boss starts out with a full bar of ore, which is gradually expended throughout phase 1 as he casts abilities. Particularly one ability that can be interrupted, if interrupted, will cause him to waste less ore and therefore remain in phase 1 longer. When the boss runs out of ore, he enters phase 2. During this phase, he does not need to be tanked, and essentially he just rolls around the room collecting ore from the ground as he does so. The ore is contained in these crates that you can see, which are attackable, and once your raid breaks enough of them, and once the boss collects the ore and fills up his ore bar, phase 1 will restart once more. Let's take a quick look at the abilities to see what exactly is going on in the fight. Throughout phase 1, Oregorger uses 4 abilities. The most important ability is Acid Torrent. The boss will target a ranged raid member, provided that at least 1/3 of your raid is at range, turning towards them and then firing a cone attack in their direction. This will deal damage to all the players in the cone. The damage is massive, however, it is mitigated by the total mitigation of the player that is closest to Oregorger within that cone. Normally this will be the tank. So essentially, Oregorger turns towards a ranged raid member, in this case almost the entire ranged group based on our positioning, and then fires this cone attack. Because the tank is closest, it is their mitigation that is used to reduce the damage that the players in the cone end up taking. This also leaves a debuff on the player that is closest to Oregorger, meaning that 2 tanks are needed to alternate between the cones. Don't try to glean too much from the footage because the ability was not exactly working perfectly on the beta, but on the live version this is how it should work. Also in phase 1, Oregorger casts the interruptible ability that I was talking about called Blackrock Barrage, which deals some amount of raid-wide damage and consumes some of his ore. Ideally, you should interrupt this as often as possible to make sure that the boss stays in phase 1 for as long as possible, allowing you to DPS him. Wretched Blackrock is an ability that Oregorger spams, which essentially leaves a void zone at the location of a random raid member, generally ranged raid members. Players will simply have to move out of these void zones. Explosive Shard targets a random raid member, a melee player as long as at least 1/3 of the raid is in melee range. This stuns the player for 4 seconds, and at the end of the stun causes them to deal damage to players around them. Essentially, everyone should move away from the stunned player. That's pretty much everything about this fight as it exists in its first tested incarnation on the beta. As we move closer to a final version and to the launch of Warlords of Draenor, you can expect to see a written guide on our website.